Zach, are you ready to start with your opening statement?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Please talk directly into the microphone so you can be heard.
Well, good evening, everyone. I want to start by thanking the League of Women Voters for hosting this evening's event, Miriam for moderating, and for all of you who are in the audience, both with us in person here at the Coralville Public Library, and those of you who are watching at home, either on the live stream or on television. My name is Zach Walls, and I am honored to be the Democratic nominee for Iowa Senate District 37 to succeed Senator Bob Dvorsky, who I believe is in the audience, who's retiring after a distinguished career in the Iowa Senate. I am somebody who, growing up with lesbian parents, learned at an early age what it feels like to be left behind or left out. And I know that there are a lot of people in our state who feel that way right now. A lot of people feel like they're being failed by a broken mental health system. There are a lot of people who feel like our education system is underfunded and that their economic futures are dwindling. And I know that we have an important work in front of the Iowa legislature in 2019 and beyond. And I decided that I wanted to run for the seat because I want to be a part of that work. After the video of my speech to the Iowa legislature in 2011 went viral, I knew that I had a choice to make. Do I want to go back to my life as usual, or do I want to keep fighting for what I believe in? I chose to fight, and I wound up traveling all over our state, having tough conversations with people in church basements and public libraries and town hall meetings about difficult conversations around marriage equality. And then I wanted to co-found and lead the campaign to end discrimination in the Boy Scouts of America. I fought for people who have been overlooked and who have been pushed aside, and I was able to win a lot of these tough fights. And that's exactly what I want to do as your next state senator. We're going to fix our broken health system. We're going to make sure that we're fully funding our education. And we're going to protect working families, including the 1 in 5 Iowa children who live beneath the poverty line. I will never forget how it feels to be left behind or left out. And I will never forget how hard families like mine had to work to get a seat at this table. I'm very proud to be running, and I hope to win your vote in this election on only 21 days, believe it or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Carl Krambeck?
This is good. I'm Carl Krambeck, and I'm running for State Senate in District 37 as well. I've worked in mechanics, construction, agriculture, and I was the research center supervisor for Hillshire Brands, where we saved the company $14 million a year on their operating costs. I live in Clarence, Iowa with my beautiful wife and 2 amazing children. I got into biology and genetics because I wanted to help the hungry. I wanted to make the next breakthrough in agriculture that would increase yields and make sure that people no longer died from starvation. Now I get to help people face-to-face at the medical laboratory in Anamosa. And I consider my running for office as an extension of my dedication to helping people. In healthcare, we have laws and regulations that prevent people from helping. We have certificates of need that have nothing to do with patient safety. They only dictate who can open up or expand a healthcare facility and where. The 15 states that don't have certificates of need pay on average 11% lower healthcare costs. In Iowa, you can still go to jail or prison for marijuana, even though it's been proven to be safe and effective at treating medical conditions like PTSD. In states that have regulated and taxed marijuana, they have not only seen an increase in revenue and population growth, they have seen a decrease in their opioid epidemics. There are other win-win scenarios for Iowa. We can issue more casino licenses, legalize sports betting. We can build 4th-generation nuclear reactors that can be retrofitted to use cheaper, safer thorium fuels. We can lower government barriers on workers by reforming occupational licensing requirements, and we can use the new revenue streams from these sources to fund our schools, healthcare, and environment without raising taxes a dime. Thank you.
The first question is from the League of Women Voters. What specific ideas do you have for bringing rural and urban communities together to solve water quality issues? And we'll start with Zach when you're ready. And we have 1 minute to respond.
when we launched this campaign in December of last year, the three kind of top issues that we were focused on were healthcare, education, and workers' rights. But as we got out into the community, started holding meet and greets, knocking on doors, water quality started coming up over and over and over again. And one of the things that became clear to me is that there is a real gap between our urban and rural areas in terms of where the responsibility lies for this problem. I've spoken with plenty of folks here in Coralville and in Iowa City who point the finger squarely at our farmers, and I've spoken with farmers who point the finger squarely at folks who are here in our urban areas who are putting too much fertilizer on their lawns or on their golf courses. And so I think that one of the things that we have to do is bring people together to talk about what the actual causes of the problem are. I think that we have to realize that this is something that we all care about, and so we're all going to have to work together to fix. There are going to be a lot of things, including more cost share for conservation projects. There might be some things looking at making sure that we're using an appropriate amount of fertilizer and some of the other chemicals that are being applied to our fields. But again, at the end of the day, we really got to work hand in hand with our farmers and with the folks who are here in our cities, who want to take care of their lawns too.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Carl Krambeck.
So the nitrogen problem is really what the water quality issue boils down to. And with nitrogen, we've had a couple research projects throughout the years that have been able to tackle this. So that's nitrogen fixation in corn is a really big one. You can do that through either nodulation. They have an aerial root system down in Mexico that you can actually utilize as well. But I would rather spend millions of dollars on research and development of newer technology that can make it easier for corn to fixate nitrogen than to spend billions on water quality issues that are kind of just Band-Aids to the issue. And then with CAFOs, I do think research into the feed-to-weight ratio of animals is a good thing to look at. Whatever, nitrogen that they have as well can be lowered, and you can grow more meat on less land if we put money into that type of research.
Our next question from the audience: would you support efforts to limit civil asset forfeiture in Iowa, including potentially ending equitable sharing practices with the federal agencies? And we'll start with Carl.
So I think when we're doing things like that, you have to look at what's public versus private. If it's benefiting a private company, I'm not really for any of those practices. I don't think that pipelines or anything like that should have been laid down, because those are benefiting private companies. They're not benefiting roads or bridges or anything that's kind of a common public utility. So I do think we should limit that with civil asset forfeiture, bare minimum.
I do think it is important to have limits on civil asset forfeiture. It is not uncommon to have some of those assets seized before an actual trial takes place, and so I think it's very important to make sure that we're not depriving innocent people of their property. At the same time, I know that there are some departments that do depend on those assets that are seized from people who are guilty of committing sometimes many crimes. And when that's the case, I think that makes sense. But I do think it is important that we have limits to make sure that we don't have needless interference in people's lives, especially if they have not committed any crime.
Thank you. The Democrats claim education funding is being reduced. Republicans say education funding is increasing. Which is it? Can you explain? And how do libertarians feel about it?
Megan?
Oh, sorry. Are we?
It's me.
Kevin, I'm so sorry.
What do libertarians believe?
You. Zach?
Miriam, it's a great question, and I think it's a great example of why so many people are frustrated with politics right now. The reality is that if you look at 8 of the last 10 years, they are the lowest increases in our allowable growth for our K-12 schools on record. And if you look at our higher education, we've pulled out almost $100 million over the last decade. So if you're going to say that education funding is up, it's true. There are some increases that are happening, but they are small increases. And when you look at our higher education, our border region schools, our community colleges, money is being pulled out out of the system, and that's a huge problem, because if you look now, you're seeing Iowa State University, University of Iowa, they want to raise tuition, and when that happens, it's going to make it more difficult for students, whether you're a first-generation college student or someone who comes from a long line of college graduates, to go to college, and that has to be a big priority. And so, when I was growing up, the K-12 schools in Iowa were, top 2, top 3 in the country. Today, we're moving towards the middle of the pack, and so that's not just a question of funding, but when 80% of your spending from your average school district is going to payroll, if you can't keep up in terms of funding, making sure those teachers get those salaries, we're going to lose those teachers to other states that are going to be willing to pay more.
And Carl.
All right. So, yeah, funding has increased, but I think, voters are frustrated with the percentages, and moving the numbers around, you can kind of highlight it one way or another. But to fund anything, you have to be able to bring in new revenue streams, and I think that is a big part of my campaign, is laying out a long stretch of ways that we can bring in new revenue to increase education funding. And I think I've done that quite well with the SAVE bill. I do think that the limitations on the money that the school gets, we could look at that, because some, instead of infrastructure, they may not need an increase in infrastructure. They may need an increase in another aspect of their individual schools. So bringing a little more local control to that is also a pretty good idea. But you have to be able to fund the things with new revenue streams.
Thank you.
I support the full reinstatement of Chapter 20 collective bargaining rights. I support it for a very simple reason, which is that state employees are telling me that it is adversely affecting them. And it's not just workers either, it's also people who are in management. Just about a week and a half ago, I was in Clarence. I met with the mayor there, who's actually a Republican. He oversees some of the public operations that the town and the county do. And he told me that he was really worried about the changes to Chapter 20. This is not somebody who's, I don't think probably going to be voting for me, but he said he was really worried about it. He'd been a frontline public sector employee, that he knew how important those contracts are, and he was worried about the fact that even though now he's in management, some of the guys that he used to work with think that they're going to be adversely affected by it. So the people I've spoken with have said something slightly different than what Representative Kaufman's heard, and so I think that we got to give the folks the protection that they had. It wasn't broken before, so there's no reason to change the bill, and I think it's really unfortunate that we're in a position where public sector workers were told one thing and got another.
Carl?
So I would reinstate collective bargaining. I think it's good enough to know that they feel that they're not being listened to as much as what I typically hear from people. And a lot of the times they weren't really bargaining for just saying, hey, give me more money. They were saying, let's take the money that we have and we'll utilize it in a different way. So as far as, like Jody brought up, healthcare costs, ending certificate of need, that would benefit that aspect of Iowa healthcare. States that do not have certificates of need have typically 11% lower healthcare costs. So that can help stem that, and that's what most of the people who I've talked to were really bargaining for, is different or better health care.
Mm-hmm. Role of legislators in women's health care decisions in pregnancy.
I mean,
Zach?
There isn't one.
Do you want to elaborate on that? Or?
I don't think you have to elaborate on it.
All right. Okay.
All right. So first of all, I'd like to say, there's good people on both sides of this issue. I don't think that we need to vilify people for believing one way or another, but as a libertarian, I believe in looking at the outcomes of a bill and not the intentions of a bill. I would never advocate for abortion. I would never go out and tell somebody to have one or not. But if you look at the intention of the bill, the intention is to lower abortions. And I don't believe that the bill has done that. If you want an abortion, you simply travel to another state. And that's why I would have opposed the heartbeat bill. things like over-the-counter birth control, things like making adoption a little easier for other options for women to have when they are going through that situation, and making sure that all the rape kits in the state are tested. For us to have thousands of rape kits not tested is just wrong.
Iowa wind turbines produce large amounts of electricity. Can the electricity be used to produce jobs in rural Iowans? For rural Iowans, sorry.
Yeah, well, look, Iowa's a national leader when it comes to wind energy. 38% of all electricity generated in Iowa comes from wind. And what that does is, yes, it absolutely does create jobs. You have wind technicians, people who are building these wind turbines. If you drive along Interstate 80, you'll see wind turbines in either direction you go. I think that there's more. I mean, I would love to see even more wind turbines coming online. I think that we need more when it comes to solar. And I think that one of the big things that we have to start making some investments in is our batteries, making sure that we can store this electricity, so when it's not windy out, we're able to build up these batteries so that we have that base load of energy available. And so, yeah, I mean, not only that, wind turbines are also creating a lot of income streams for folks who are in rural communities, and that income can be used to support families, to make sure that schools are getting the money they need. So wind energy is great, and I'm glad that Iowa is a leader, and I think that it's a leadership role that we have to continue.
Yeah, Carl, and please remember to speak directly into the mic.
Oh, okay. So wind and solar, I see them as kind of a way for people to gain independence from energy companies. But right now, what happens is we give our tax dollars in, and then the energy companies take it, and then they set up the windmills for us, as opposed to us putting them on our house and putting them next to our house. And I'm not fully for that. I don't think it should be commercialized in that way. But I do believe that there's other technologies out there. So molten salt reactors, thorium reactors are one of the most revolutionary fourth-generation nuclear technologies out there that can provide cheaper, cleaner, safer energy and are walk-away safe. So if you take everybody out of a normal nuclear facility, the facility will melt down. But if you take everybody out of one of these reactors, it will slowly shut down with no harm done. So that's where we should move in the future.
I'm going to read the whole question. I provide home intervention and education to children aged birth to 3 who have disabilities and developmental delays. Much of my service area is in Washington County. Families there are being told they can no longer fill prescriptions or get medical equipment at local pharmacies because these pharmacies have stopped accepting Medicaid. What is your vision for fixing the disaster that is Medicaid? And we're starting with Carl, correct?
So I was never a big fan of privatization. I think that companies need to earn your money, not have a politician give it to them. That being said, I do think there is a slight benefit when it comes to the poor for saving money. I think that preventative care they have and privatization they have shown to save us money on that. But those that are elderly or those that have a long-term disability, those companies can't save us money on those people. The only way they can save money with those particular groups of people is by denying coverage, and I don't think that it was, it's obviously not intentional. Nobody knew how this bill would work out. People saying, oh, privatization way back when was going to be, bad or good. We needed to see how the bill worked out before we could actually try and find ways to fix it. And I think we're ready to tweak it in proper ways.
Kevin?
I think one of the most important qualities in a legislator is the ability to admit when a mistake was made and taking action to correct the mistake when there's a mistake that has to be fixed. Medicaid privatization is clearly one of those mistakes. Representative Kaufman is right. This was not something that was passed by the legislature. It was done by executive fiat by former Governor Terry Branstad. But the legislature does have a responsibility to fix this problem if the governor won't. The reality is that Medicaid privatization is a disaster. It is failing patients. It is failing providers. It is having creating devastating impacts in communities, and it's affecting people like the woman who asked the question tonight. I think it's really important that we make sure that the providers who are doing this work are being compensated. We may not be able to fully reverse Medicaid privatization, but I think at this point we have to try. If that isn't possible, we absolutely should carve out portions of the long-term chronic care population, some folks who have intellectual disabilities. There are things that we can do, but where we are currently clearly isn't working. But rather than holding the MCOs accountable, last year, this year, Governor Reynolds gave the MCOs a 7.5% raise for the job that they're doing. That's the wrong direction. We have to get moving in the right direction.
We talk about long-term mental health issues as well. Do you think that we need to open more long-term mental health facilities?
Mental health in our state is currently, our system's in a state of crisis. Not only do we currently rank 49th in the country when it comes to the number of public mental health beds per capita, the Medicaid privatization disaster has put elevated pressure on the providers who are in private practice. You're seeing, as Jody mentioned, some of these group homes are being shut down. It's becoming more difficult for people to get discharged from an acute care bed where they might be the University of Iowa hospitals and clinics being stepped down in that continuum of care. And so you have people waiting in the emergency room for 36, 48, 72 hours before they're actually able to even get any treatment in the first place. And so one of the things that we have to do is expand the number of public psychiatric beds that are available in the state. We have to, again, reverse Medicaid privatization. And I agree 100% with Representative Kaufman. We have to be taking a very serious look at children's mental health. I was very glad to see that Governor Reynolds finally added that to the purview of what she's working on, but we need to do more, including at the school district level. Just last week in Clarence, I met with folks at the junior senior high school. They're seeing a huge spike in anxiety, depression among teenagers. We have to take that very seriously.
So I work in a hospital over in Anamosa. It's pretty close to the prison, so we do get to see firsthand these instances. And it's a cost savings measure, funding mental health. Prisons, hospitals are very expensive, but getting them the treatment that they need, getting children the treatment that they need, and really getting the stigma away from people who have a mental health problem. Drug addicts, we need to get this stigma away from them as well. We need to have things like needle exchange that puts drug addicts right in front of somebody that can help them out. When they go to exchange, they're right in front of pamphlets, they're right in front of people that can help them. And I think it's proven to show that if you treat drug addiction as a mental health or a public health situation instead of criminal justice, we all win.
How can the state help small farmers and those just beginning to farm?
Yeah, I think there's probably some bipartisan agreement on this, which is good. I think it's very important for us to note that actually, I think last year was the first time in the last 40 years that the average age of a farmer went down instead of went up. And incidentally, that was the same year that I think the average size of a farm went down instead of going up. And so that really does go part and parcel in making sure that young farmers have the opportunity to farm on smaller acreages if they're farming vegetables, livestock, creating markets with some of the food hubs that are now being talked about as a kind of a central point of exchange for especially young vegetable farmers. I think that's something that's really exciting. And again, part of it is making sure that farmers have access to credit. Part of the challenge is that we're in a very turbulent, kind of commodity price-driven international market, and so I think banks are often hesitant to lend to farmers who are trying to buy land, and that's where I think there is that cash flow that comes with livestock, where that often is where you can get a loan to make that happen. But if you're not interested in livestock, I think it can be hard to get into farming if you're a young person.
Well, I think it really comes down to supporting our community colleges. Farming's a highly skilled trade. You have to be good at biology, you have to be good at maintenance, you have to be good at handling money. And our community colleges are really putting forward the students and the people that have those skills. So if you want to help out future farmers, I do think that the community colleges are really the people that are already doing the work to help bring skilled workers forward. And you can really kill two birds with one stone with that, because we already have a skilled worker shortage. We, when funding education, I do think that, you know, if you have any left over afterwards, you really should look into the community colleges, because they do the work already that the legislators want to do. So.
So the question is written is, as an elected official, what do you feel is your most sacred duty to help your district? And if you feel awkward talking about your most sacred duty, maybe if you could author one bill next year, what would it be and why? Zach?
That's a big word, sacred. You know, I think, you know, our politics is obviously in a very tough place right now. I think all of us can agree, Democrat, Republican, Independent, Libertarian, that politics is, I think a lot of people feel frustrated, people feel angry, people feel scared. And so I think probably the most sacred responsibility is to just approach this job with compassion and an understanding that we may not see issues eye to eye, but that we don't have to be mean about it. We don't have to bully people about it. And I, you know, I remember what it feels. I know what it feels like to be afraid of your government. I know what it feels like to be afraid of politicians who don't include you or your family in their vision for the future of our state or our country. And I will make sure that I will do my best. I think it is my sacred responsibility as a state, you know, legislator to make sure that every person in this district knows that you will have in me somebody who will fight for you no matter who you are, what your family looks like, where you come from, and that I will always listen to you no matter what.
Thank you. Carl?
Well, everything's connected to the economy for me. Everything needs to be paid for. So whether it's education, whether it's health care, whether it's water quality, every single one of these things needs to be paid for. And we can't do that without a thriving economy. So that's why I'm really pushing forward these new revenue streams. That's why I'm pushing for marijuana legalization. That's why I'm pushing for casinos, more casinos in Iowa. That's why I'm pushing for things like sports betting. Without a thriving economy, we can't spend money on even the most basic things, like making sure that others are protected from harm. So we need that thriving economy to pay for all of the things that we hold dear and important.
Just want to summarize how you feel about gun control? And I'm sorry, where are we starting? I'm totally lost.
I think I'm up.
I think it's Zach. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
So I shot growing up. I shot rifles, shotguns, revolvers growing up in the Boy Scouts, and I'm you know, old enough to remember when the NRA was mostly focused on actually training people on how to use firearms responsibly. And I think, you know, part of what I learned is that if you're going to treat firearms responsibly, part of that means having responsible laws. And it starts with enforcing the laws that we already have on the books. I think making sure that we have universal background checks that are actually being enforced. I think that there are things that we can do to make it more difficult for bad actors who are not interested in using firearms legally to get their hands on weapons in ways that won't compromise the rights of people who are law-abiding citizens. And I do think that part of what we have to do is make sure that we're electing lawmakers who do have an understanding of what firearms are and how they're used, and kind of what specifications may be. But, you know, at the end of the day, I think it's clear that the laws that we have on the books are not adequate. Historically in the state, we had fairly strong gun safety laws, but we've been moving in the wrong direction over the last 2 years. And so I think that we have to take a much closer look at where things are.
Thank you. Carl?
So, you know, to me, no bill is going to protect you from your own firearm. So just, you know, with my nephews learning about guns, I just want to state, you know, always treat every firearm as though it's loaded. Always keep the muzzle pointed in a safe direction. Keep your finger outside of the trigger area until you're ready to fire. Always be sure of what's in front of your target and what's behind it. And really, if you follow those guidelines, that takes care of the majority of accidents. For me, I'm not a big fan of background checks. I don't think they work. The Cincinnati, Ohio shooter, the Parkland, Florida shooter, Texas church shooting, Las Vegas County shooting, Orlando, Florida shooting, San Bernardino, Fort Hood 1 and 2. Every single one of those people passed a background check. I don't think that background checks are the answer, but I do think that we can up the security in our gun-free zones like our schools.
Candidate will now have 2 minutes to make a closing statement. Do you guys want to start with Zach or start with Carl? Is that where we are in the rotation?
Yeah, sure.
All right, we'll start with Carl.
So, as politicians, we need to appreciate each other's ability and knowledge rather than bullying each other just because we have an R, a D, or an L by our name. Citizens, as well as future generations, need to see that we can discuss and debate issues without unnecessary negativity. I have not always been successful in this, but as a father, I have to make sure that I'm setting a good example for my children. We also have to acknowledge that Iowa has limited resources. We're losing population to states with lower taxes. We're funding things barely anyone cares about, which takes away from things that everyone cares about. I care about education. I care about my children's generation growing up better off than those before it. When we send people to jail for marijuana, that's money we're not spending on education. When we deny casinos a license, that's revenue that doesn't go to our mental health crisis. When we don't allow healthcare facilities to open or expand, we're making patients pay more. And when we don't allow for sports betting, that's revenue that we won't use to clean our water. When we invest in expensive green energy instead of cheaper, safer, and more reliable alternatives, we're taking more money out of the pockets of the poor. And when we give your money to well-off companies that ensures that the best product, the best service, or the best quality can't compete with the business that has the most well-connected friends. Our laws, regulations, and elections have consequences. I'm Carl Cranbeck, and I'm asking for your vote. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll start again by thanking the League and the folks who were able to participate in our democracy and come out tonight to ask us the questions that you wanted to have answered. You know, I'm also thinking about the topics that we didn't get to tonight, things like housing, which is an issue here in Coralville just as much as it is out in Clarence. Economic development, which requires a new approach, whether you're in an urban area or a rural area. The opioid epidemic and our suicide rate, which is in the news recently. I'm sure some of you heard that the Iowa City Community School District lost 2 teachers in unrelated incidents recently. And so making sure that we're continuing the conversation about the challenges and the pressures that so many people are facing right now is very important. But there are also other things like childcare, which I hear about again and again when I'm out knocking on doors, or the need for a universal pre-K program. So there are many more things that are facing our state, and that we need people who are willing to get in there to work across the aisle if necessary, to work within your own party. Sometimes that's hard too, to roll your sleeves up and get the work done. In addition to being an advocate for the LGBT community and leading a national campaign to end discrimination in the Boy Scouts of America, I've also been a small business owner and an entrepreneur. Whenever you're in that role, you have to think really hard about the problems that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. You have to be able to find new solutions, things that people haven't necessarily thought of before. And that's something that I'm hoping to do as your next state senator. And again, I also want to go back to something that I mentioned briefly earlier, is this need for compassion in our politics again. You know, we are at a time when more Democrats hate Republicans and more Republicans hate Democrats than any time in our country's history. And I think that we can all agree that we don't want our politics to become a ratchet. We don't want it to just get worse and worse and worse. And I don't have the answer for you. I don't know how we break through this. But I know that we don't do it by bullying other people, by putting other people down. I think that we have to get back to what statesmanship and what politics is supposed to be about, which is listening to the people and figuring out how we can all move forward together, because we all do better when we all do better. My name is Zach Walls. I'm asking for your vote for Senate District 37. And if you want to get involved, we've got a lot more information outside. We've only got 3 weeks left, and we'd love to have you join us out on the doors. Thank you.
I want to give it.